The NBA's upcoming expansion to Seattle and Las Vegas has been one of the worst-kept secrets in professional sports. Adam Silver has all but guaranteed that it will be happening soon, probably after a new TV deal gets ironed out later this year. Silver said in July last year, "It's natural that organizations grow over time." And he's right, the NBA is due for expansion. The last time the number of teams in the league increased was 2004. It's been nearly 20 years. That's the longest stretch of time the NBA has ever gone without expansion. Now, Seattle and Las Vegas are the two rumored cities, although the league won't admit it. They want to keep leverage to maximize the sale price of the two new franchises. That's why Mexico City, Vancouver, and other cities keep getting floated, but really it's going to be Seattle and Vegas. Why? Well, Seattle is the largest metro area in America that doesn't have a team. It's also a relatively wealthy market, which is good for business if you're an NBA franchise. Plus, considering the rich history of the Supersonics franchise, Seattle is a no-brainer. Vegas, on the other hand, is a harder sell. It's not a huge market by population. The Mexico City metro area has literally 10 times more people. Or if you want to keep it stateside, there's 7 other metro areas without NBA teams that have bigger populations: Austin, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Baltimore, San Diego, Tampa, and of course Seattle. And there's not really that much basketball culture or history associated with Vegas either. But Las Vegas does have the most important thing behind it: money. There's rich investors, there's a shiny new arena, there's potential gambling tie-ins, and there's a never-ending stream of tourists eager for live entertainment. Vegas is, theoretically at least, a goldmine for the NBA, so it's virtually a shoo-in for that second new franchise. But what do you think? Are Seattle and Vegas deserving of the two new NBA franchises? Let me know in the comments if you think a different city should get one of the new teams. Anyways, let's return to the NBA map. So this is the current conference dividing line: 15 teams in the East and 15 teams in the West. And these are the current divisions: 3 in the East, 3 in the West, 5 teams in each division. As you can see, they're not exactly divided in an equitable way. The Northwest division is insanely spread out. Portland and Minneapolis are 1,400 miles apart. That's farther apart than any two teams in the entire Eastern Conference. Now, admittedly, this is somewhat unavoidable. Cities in the West are simply more spread out. But I think the NBA could improve this, especially with the two new teams entering the fold. Okay, so now let's bring in Seattle and Vegas. They bring the total number of NBA teams from 30 to 32. Now technically, the NBA could change nothing about the divisions and conferences and add Seattle to the Northwest Division and Vegas to the Pacific Division and have two 16 divisions and uneven conferences. Thankfully though, there's multiple reasons that would never happen, most notably that the teams wouldn't have an equal chance at the playoffs. But that leads to another option, which would just be to dissolve the divisions or even the conferences entirely. They've become less and less important over time, especially the divisions, and a lot of people want the playoffs to just be the 16 best teams regardless of conference. Again though, for a variety of reasons, I highly doubt the NBA would ever do that. There's way too much history, rivalry, and frankly stubbornness to make such a radical change. Plus, there's still obviously a huge convenience factor in consolidating travel as much as possible and playing your closest neighbors the most. So, if the NBA is going to keep divisions and conferences, but add two new teams that will necessitate a realignment, what's the best way to do it? Okay, first off, before we get to the divisions, let's address the conferences, because that's pretty simple. So if there's two new Western Conference teams, the Eastern Conference will need to absorb one of the closest teams from the West to make it an even split, 16 teams in each conference. Clearly, based on the map, Minnesota, Memphis, and New Orleans are the obvious 3 options. Technically, Memphis is the farthest east of the 3, but Minnesota is actually the better choice to go east. It's the farthest and most isolated Western Conference team. Their closest conference neighbor is OKC, nearly 700 miles away. And on the flip side, if they join the Eastern Conference, they'll be much closer to several of their Midwestern neighbors like Milwaukee. So, now the new conference map looks like this: 16 teams in the East, including Minnesota, and 16 teams in the West, including Seattle and Vegas. But now comes the tricky part: the divisions. So like I said before, if the NBA keeps the current model of 3 divisions per conference, they won't be equally distributed. 32 teams does not divide equally by 6 divisions. However, there are 2 other options: the NFL model of 8 4-team divisions, or the NHL model of 4 8-team divisions. Both models would result in an equal distribution of teams. So let's say the NBA wants to go the NFL route and have 8 divisions, 4 in each conference, with 4 teams each. Here's the best way to achieve that. We'll start in the Northwest with the newest team, Seattle. Obviously, they're going to be joined by Portland, but then you could either go with Utah and Denver, or Sacramento and Golden State. we're going to go with the latter option. So that'll be our first division. We'll call it the Northwest. Next, we have the two LA teams, and it makes the most sense for them to be with Vegas and Phoenix, who they're already in a division with. Whenever possible, I'm trying to keep things as similar as I can to the current system, because that's what I think the NBA would do. So in light of that, we'll call this the Pacific Division. Then Utah and Denver come next, and there's a big unavoidable gap between them and the next teams, but OKC and Dallas would be the closest, so that'll be the next division. It's fairly spread out, but it's still an improvement over the current Northwest Division. For this one, we'll keep the name of Dallas's current division. This will be the Southwest. Then that leaves 4 final teams in the Western Conference: San Antonio, Houston, New Orleans, and Memphis, and this will be a new division called the South. Okay, now moving on to the Eastern Conference, and we'll start down in Miami. This one is pretty easy. It's almost the same as the current division. It's going to be called the Southeast, and Miami will be joined by Orlando, Atlanta, and Charlotte. Then we'll move up the coast to the Northeast, and this is another division that's going to remain almost exactly the same minus Toronto. It's going to be Boston, the 2 New York teams, and Philly, and it's the new Atlantic Division. Then let's jump over to the newest Eastern Conference team, Minnesota. They'll clearly be with Milwaukee and Chicago, but then you could go in a couple of different directions here, but we'll add Indiana to this group, and this will be the new division, the Midwest. Finally, that leaves 4 teams remaining in the Eastern Conference: Detroit, Cleveland, Toronto, and Washington. This last group will be the new Central Division. So that's it for our proposed NFL-style division distributions, with 8 divisions, 4 per conference, with 4 teams each. Generally, I think this is far superior to the current divisions. It eliminates that terribly spread out old Northwest division, and it improves the regional cohesiveness of certain areas, like Toronto being with Detroit and Cleveland instead of Boston and New York, or like Portland being with Seattle and San Francisco instead of Oklahoma City and Minnesota. But what do you think about the NBA having 8 4-team divisions? Let me know if you think any of them should be different. Okay, so the other option that the NBA could pursue would be an NHL-style division structure, with 4 8-team divisions, 2 per conference. To make things easier, we're just going to keep the same divisions from the NFL style, but combine them. You could make tweaks here and there, but ultimately it wouldn't make much of a difference. So starting off in the West, we'll combine the Northwest Division and the Pacific Division. This will just retain the title Pacific Division. Then the remaining Western Conference teams from the Southwest and the South will merge into the new Southwest Division. It's fairly spread out, but that's just the nature of having 8-team divisions. So then in the Eastern Conference, it makes the most sense to combine the Midwest and the Central, so we'll call this new one the North Division. This is probably the most cohesive of the new 8-team divisions. And then that leaves the 2 East Coast divisions to merge and form the new Atlantic Division. So what do you think about these bigger NHL-style divisions? Is it better or worse than the NFL option? And is either option better than the current divisions? If and when Seattle and Vegas get added to the NBA, do you think they should use it as an opportunity to change up the divisions and conferences, abolish them completely, or just do nothing and have uneven conferences and divisions? Let me know which option you think the NBA will pursue and which one they should pursue.